Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Supergene Unleashed. Today's guest is a woman who doesn't just walk into a room, she lights it up. I'm super excited to welcome Nishma Patel Robb, who is a fellow twin mom and now the fierce and fabulous founder of a company called Glittersphere, which is a platform that exists to help women stop being invisible and start becoming unstoppable. And actually, her title is the Chief Sparkle Officer, which is by far the coolest title I have ever heard in my life. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit jealous. I absolutely love sparkles, glitters, everything that shines and is super over the top. So I really appreciate that Nishma has agreed to come on the show today. If you can please tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what Glittersphere is.
Oh, thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. And look, hey, I think there's enough sparkle and glitter to share with everybody. So feel free to take what you want from it, Stacey. You're very welcome. I feel like, there's a natural attraction from people who like the idea of, I suppose that kind of the dopamine hit you get from being around sparkle and glitter. So, a little bit about myself. I wrapped up a 30-year corporate career last year, very intentionally. I always say to people, it wasn't just one of those kind of Netflix sliding doors moments. It was, ta-da, I'm going to walk away from it. It was something that was probably a long time in the building to it. But I did it because I wanted to pursue something that has always been a real passion to me. And I suppose an opportunity to rewrite the rules. And so I created the Glittersphere as part of a reflection, I suppose, of my own career journey in life, and much more so of an observation that I had of the many women and sometimes men that I'd kind of worked around, that visibility wasn't really about vanity, it was about power. And yet so much of our society, and particularly the workplace, is in some respects we're asked to kind of make ourselves smaller. I don't know for you, but often, I've done it. I've seen other happen to others, but, often as a little girl, or we would say, particularly to little girls, but, it's all don't show off, stay quiet. And in the workplace, I would quite often see that, those that were more expressive or louder or self-promotional even were considered to be, kind of against the grain. And yet I would often...
That's a very true observation that I've experienced firsthand in terms of being told that you're too, direct, you're too loud, you're too forward. So I can completely relate.
Yeah. And so many women do. And I think, or even if you don't, there's a fear that you're not. I think there's a case of, how's that feel? So for me, it was a real recognition that actually, particularly in the world that we live in today, being able to be distinctive and visible, write your own path, not having to conform to the expectations set by whoever at whatever point, is really critical if we're going to drive success. All of this comes back to a very single focus point, which is I have seen the transformational benefit, opportunity, brilliance of financial freedom. And I talk about financial freedom rather than wealth or rich, because they're very different things. Financial freedom is the thing that affords other women or other people really to be able to achieve anything in their life. It gives you choice. And with choice, you have everything. And I've always believed this, I always think everything in life is about choice. And personally for me, and maybe it was, hitting 50 a few years ago, a sense of mortality, a sense of wanting to think about kind of legacy and a career bucket list of things I wanted to do, it stopped me in my tracks to say, I really want to pursue this. Because for me, I'm in pursuit of freedom of time. I want that time with my kids. I want time for myself. I want to be able to do the things I want to do. And I can only really achieve freedom of time if I have freedom of finance. So that's what I had seen too often. So whether it's pay gaps, whether it's the fact of there's a huge lack of investment in female-led businesses, despite incredible returns. It's like, why are these things happening? In the workplace, I would see so many women getting frustrated with progression, particularly midlife women who, you've worked a certain amount of years, 20, 25, 30 years plus, and you get to a point of frustration to either it just doesn't live up to the dream that you'd hoped it would be, or the progression is too slow, or it's laden with burnout, etc. And so it's observing this kind of I don't want to say it's cataclysmic, but, observing this shift in lots of people around me. And I think maybe the pandemic was also part of a kind of accelerator here. I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to help women really discover their true ability to shine. I wanted them to come out the shadows. I want them to be able to earn the money that they deserve to. And I'm a big believer that stories can change the world. And I think part of this is if I can encourage and support and facilitate more and more women to step into the spotlight and to share their story for a very clear purpose, this purpose being success, growth, whatever it might be, their ambition is. But if we can do that, I do think there can be a meaningful shift in the world. Because look, hey, we can see the world needs some help right now. Women are not owning the place that they should do. We've seen the benefit when they do. And so as someone who's spent so much of her career looking at representation and diversity in the truest sense from a creative point of view, I've decided that this next era of my life would be one that I had focused on really facilitating that. So in shorthand, I talk about Glittersphere, which is a community, it's a platform, it's a method, there's training, there's all sorts of stuff. But it's really about coming together in that support piece. As I talk about it as TED Talk meets Studio 54. So the shorthand on that is that TED Talks are a great kind of, shortcut in our brains of thinking about someone who's a great speaker, who can tell their story succinctly and powerfully, is someone who has the ability to stand on that stage and command an audience and show that ability to really influence change. So I think we have a shortcut to kind of understanding what that means. And Studio 54 absolutely talks the fact that I like music, I like glitter, I like sparkle, but it goes deeper than that. Studio 54, if I take one of the things that came out of it that really kind of I've been attracted to beyond the glamour, it was a place where anything could go. It was a place where I believed that dreams were possible. There was no limit. They definitely had its hedonistic bit, but if we take its kind of, behavioral sense, it was this idea that there's anything possible. And for me, the dance floor, I think, is one of the most democratic places in the world. Mm-hmm. You doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter what your job title is. If you step on a dance floor and you rub shoulders with someone else, we are the same. And we are our most free and expressive on a dance floor. So for me, the idea of the Glittersphere came from this meeting of those two worlds, the TED Talks meet Studio 54. But the Glittersphere and that whole idea was that ball of sparkle throws light everywhere. And for me, it was like all those little fragments of light, which are kind of individual stories of people, and being able to send that as far as possible in a really non-linear way. It's not predictable. It's not pattern there because these are the kind of core values I have, stepping out and saying what you want, redefining, not being defined by labels and tropes and stereotypes and career paths, etc. Owning the space that we should have unapologetically and probably unpredictably as well. And being able to come together and recognize that together our light source is more powerful than individually. So that's what it's all about. And I'm having an absolute ball doing it. It's incredibly hard work. Every day is challenging. Running your own business after being in corporate life for my entire career is a real shift. And I think that's one of the things I really love about what I do. And I build and share vulnerably and openly, which is sometimes really scary, but I have learned that that helps me, keeps me accountable when I talk about the things I'm going to do. But I also talk about the processes because I'm a big believer of no gatekeeping. It's one of my things actually when I was pregnant as well. I used to find it really frustrating that there wasn't more sharing of some of the things that you really wish you'd known when you hit a point and you go, God, I wish I'd known about this. And I don't think it takes away from discovery, but the more I can do to facilitate and help women to reinvent, whether that's within a career or outside a career or into a business, whatever it might be, whether it's to help women to grow those businesses, whatever it might be, I think that's the things I learn that I'm doing through reinvention, through growth, through storytelling, through confidence, through being able to embrace that, the things I learn, all of that, I want to be able to kind of give and share to others and create a movement of sharing. And one of the things I love within my community that I've built at Glittersphere, which has multiple levels, but there's a membership community as well. I love the fact that I can go in there sometimes and I see the members of what I call the glitterati, the wonderful women in there, sharing their wisdom, supporting each other. And that's the movement I want.
I think that's absolutely incredible. I mean, it's what obviously inspired me to reach out to you to join Supergene Unleashed, because it completely aligns with my mission as well, which is entirely focused on female empowerment. And I've had a similar pathway in the sense of, spending 20 years in a global career working at big corporations and, having leadership positions similar to you, and kind of fighting that fight to maintain your visibility and voice in situations where, unfortunately, it's still so male dominated. And it's crazy that we're sat here in 2025 and, you know, research after research, to your point, what you rightfully said is that, when women are involved, better outcomes are delivered. These are just the facts. And yet we still have to fight tooth and nail to, have that presence. And we still also have so many people. I've actually even encountered women doing this to other women where they try to dim your light.
I always say to people don't just want male allies, they want women, they want female allies. And that's why I'm very intentional about what I talk about in the Glittersphere. And actually, when I go out and do talks or I help people, it's the best thing we could do as women is support each other.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
That would shift things if we could just start with that level of sisterhood and support, and the male allies that will do so, because it is, unfortunately, too often I hear from women, it's other women that are pulling them down.
Yeah. And the thing is, how can men take us seriously as well if, we're battling against each other? One other thing about Glittersphere that I saw on your website was likening it to a disco ball, which you kind of explained, that it removes this hierarchy and it creates this, sameness in a sense of equality. And so that was really a beautiful expression with Studio 54 and dancing and being able to authentically be you. And I think that in the workplace, a lot of people, especially women, face situations where they don't feel like they can be themselves. They're a little bit too afraid to speak up. They're a little bit too afraid to face a difficult situation. So I really appreciate that you're so focused on reinvention. I want to dig a little bit back to something that you talked about at the very beginning, which was how you obviously left corporate in your early 50s and you had this moment where you really realized that what you were doing in that corporate pathway was no longer serving you. And you said that it was, of course, not like a sliding door moment and not an overnight decision. Can you kind of walk us through the process of how you got comfortable with making the decision? Because I think that, in my circle, for instance, a lot of women are a bit afraid because they don't necessarily know if they have that freedom of finance that you also referred to, which does give that comfort factor, because it is scary to walk away from a big title and a big stable salary. So, or what steps can you recommend for people who are kind of in a similar situation where they're having this contemplation about what they should do next?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a difficult decision, first of all, for a number of reasons. It could be fear, as you say. It's often fear of like, will I have enough money to continue living? Will I be able to do the things I want to do? Can I do anything differently? This is, we're very conditioned to the environment that we're often in. So for me, there's a number of things when I talk to people about the stages I went through. I think one is there is the greatest thing, wherever you are, whether you're in a job, in a business, whatever the situation might be, is the self-awareness piece. And it sounds obvious, but unless you really know what your own values and your sense of alignment is, it's really hard to kind of go, well, what's next? And I don't mean what's next in the sense of having a plan, but it's a direction. You've got to kind of have a sense of direction. Because actually, I think having a little bit, which is probably slightly kind of controversial, but I actually think having slightly less of a plan is a good idea. You have got to have a sense of destination. And I say why, because I think as you go through that period of time, so the first thing is self-awareness. Not everyone's going to feel this way, and it'll come at different points for different people. I believe everyone will come to a point at some point in their lives, probably multiple times over, where you will stop and reevaluate. Those are the natural curves of progression and the way that we live our lives and experience it. So that self-awareness is critical to say, am I still kind of growing, learning, enjoying? Does this align with my values? And it isn't about having a bad day at work and coming home and going, right, that's it. It's about a period of time. So for me, I was actually really loving my job, brilliant people I worked with, fantastic organization, amazing product that I truly believed in. But what started to happen as I thought about my own alignment of values was also a sense of what I wanted to do and achieve. I sometimes feel like we put so much pressure on the places that we work, and a little bit like the pressure we put on our relationships as well, actually, at times, is that it has to fulfill and deliver against everything that matters to us. And I just don't think that's feasible. I don't think a single thing or moment can give us everything. And actually years ago, when we think about how we lived in communities and that work was just work, and you got fulfillment and purpose and joy and love from other different communities and places, whether it was whether it's religion, whether it's family, whether it's other pursuits, whatever it might be. Whereas now we kind of put so much into one place. Now, I don't think that's going to change. I think that's technology and the way that life is. But, once I hit a point of what I call kind of misalignment, that's for me was the stage where I started to go, well, hold on, is it because I'm not learning or I'm not fulfilling what I want to do? I had this niggling sense of I just wanted to see more impact with something that mattered to me. And the place I work isn't necessary that it didn't align with those same beliefs of equality, etc. But it's where was it in the scale of other things that needed to be done? And I think what happens is you start a job, you start a business, and initially it's like 100%. Fulfills everything you want to do, you're learning, with that steep learning curve, it aligns with your values and all those wonderful things that it does, because often newness brings that, but it is because it's choice. And over time, that shifts. Doesn't mean you're unhappy. It just means that shifts because priorities and things will change. That's often when you see people will move roles in an organization. I moved roles many times in all the places I've ever worked, even if I've stayed there a long time. So there was a sense of freshness, newness, but new challenge, new alignment, new opportunities. Those things are great. However, over time, there's only so many places you can move or do and keep doing that, because I think actually every person hits their point where this sense of purpose, this sense of like, why am I doing this? When I wake up every day, why am I doing this? Is it the things I wanted to do? So that self-awareness piece is critical. And actually one really great bit of advice that was given to me and I share with everyone, I think it's something you should all keep alive, is this idea of a career bucket list. We go into careers often with, certainly over time, this becomes a stronger point, is that we accept what we have. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does take us away from the things that we perhaps set out to go, I would like to do this. Those might be out of things that align with your superpowers. There might be things that align with your values. It might be the way that you want to live your life, which I love that more and more so people are thinking about designing their life for them, not just for the job or the career. And those things become really important. And I think we do lose our way a little bit along the way. And so it's stopping yourself to kind of go, what am I in pursuit of? And one of the things is, chase that alignment. I was definitely chasing kind of, I'll be honest, like job titles, progression, ambition. I wanted to have that sense of like, it made me feel that sense of progress. And that was right, absolutely right for all of us at different points of our life. But there then came something that for me was like a real bit kind of, it was a lights on moment, which was sense of, is this on my career bucket list? And so those are the things that were skill based. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a TV presenter and I liked talking. And I now have newfound outlets like podcasts and stuff like that. There were things that I really cared passionately about. I knew I really enjoyed. I loved seeing and working with women about helping them develop their skill to stand out and speak. It was something I'd kind of stumbled upon and discovered I was really good at. Likewise, relationships and networking and all the creative, skills that I had developed over time. And I just wanted to do more of that. And the reality is often in jobs is you start to do less and less of that and you start to do more and more of something else. It's always the thing of people say, gosh, the further you move up, you just take on more responsibilities as a leader and you get further away from your craft. And that's inevitable. But there comes a point where perhaps for me it was around doing that. And for me, reinvention and this shift in career was about wanting to be more of me, not a different me, just more of me. And I think that's the other key thing when I say to people, reinvention is about not becoming someone different. Most times when we're reinventing our lives, we're just becoming more and more who we are. We're just seeking greater alignment to what is important and matters to us. And I think that's really wonderful when you think of it that way, because it's a lot more comfortable to think about I'm just becoming more of who I am than to feel like you've got the burden of becoming somebody different. In actual fact, I felt like I had become somebody different over years to conform and fit in and be more acceptable or more progressive in what I was doing. Whereas now I feel like I'm more in my true alignment, that I can get up in the morning and wear sequins and do the stuff I do. So I think that's a key thing. Writing that career bucket list and reviewing it regularly, in a job, not in a job, whatever it might be, have it. It's a little bit like your own kind of manifesto to yourself. And then I think it's about the financial freedom piece was, I haven't achieved financial freedom, which is why I still have to continue to work really hard and will do. But I had managed to create a buffer for a period of time that allowed me to step away. And what I say to women and to anyone actually is the key thing here is, and I didn't do this, and I kind of wish I had a little bit, is it's so important to start to think about how you design the life for you. So can you build and do some certain things alongside your day job so that that jump is not as scary as it could be? How do you design your life in a way that you can ensure that there is a degree of income that keeps you protected rather than for strife? When you're striving, you can strive beyond, but just stay to the level of protection. And those things are important, and they require planning and thought and how you do it. The parallel tracks of life, I never thought was possible. I used to hear people had side hustles and stuff like that. And for me, it was like, gosh, how would I ever be able to fit that in against a busy day job and twins and all the rest of it? And for years, I couldn't have done. But actually, there was definitely a point where I could have rethought about how I was spending my time. And I said this recently, I've been spending a lot more time with millennials and Gen Z, different generations who have very different attitudes to the workplace. And one of the things I'm endlessly inspired by them is that they design their work and their life for them. So they design and go, I don't want to work 5 days a week. I want to work X number of days a week. I want to be able to go off to the beach or go for a walk at that time, whatever it might be. And rather than seeing that as some self-entitled kind of, snowflake generation, I look at it and go, they're in command of the things that really matter to them. So long as the contract they then make to work elsewhere fits around that. I think that's been perhaps the misalignment around, workplace angst around different attitudes to work. But I love the idea that people are going, how can I make the money I need to make to live the life I want to live, to do that? Rather than perhaps my generation, which was how can I make as much money as possible to climb to the top? And what often happens is people get to that stage and realize they're utterly miserable. So this idea, this idea of going, what do I want to do, career bucket list, and how do I design a life? And that's why financial freedom is really important, because you're talking about not wealth generation, but freedom generation. How do I do that? What are the means and things I could do? What can I start to test and dabble with in my current situation that does that? And what I now say, because I can do it only on self-reflection, if somebody had said that to me, I'd have gone, no way, I've got no time, there's absolutely nothing I can do. The reality is, we're all really good at finding time. We're really good at finding time if we need to. And it's not about a big chunk of time, it might be just a couple of hours. And I wish I had done more of that when I was in employment. It would have just created a slightly softer landing for me as I left to come and do what I do. So I do encourage that. I also think as human beings, we serve ourselves better, particularly now in a world that's so uncertain. There's so many things going on. We can't predict what's going to happen next. Is our brains and our soul is almost happier when there are multiple things happening. Not too many so you're overwhelmed, but it's about saying, well, this gives me fulfillment. I'm experimenting with this. I'm going to try this out. And you're trying things out to determine what works and suits you. And so sometimes we're so narrow focused on one particular mission, we start to lose sight of other things. And that's why I sometimes say to people, you need a design for life and know what you want, but actually leave enough room in that for serendipity, for curiosity. When I left Google, I didn't come out with I had a vision and I had a mission of what I wanted to achieve. I didn't have the roadmap entirely mapped out of this is what I'm going to do. And I'm so glad I didn't. even though it was really unnerving probably to me and other people, and was terrifying because people were like, oh my God, does she know what she's doing? Why is she doing that? But I had that sense of wanting to stay open enough to build with others and to take inputs and discover and be serendipitous. And if I hadn't, I don't think I'd have been able to keep evolving the business in the way that I have. And also started new ventures alongside this that are great additions to what I'm doing. So keeping yourselves open to doing that, I think, is really important. And I think that is where, coming back to a point that we were talking about earlier, I wear sequins every day because I love it. It makes me stand out, which I have learned is really important when you're trying to build a personal brand, meet new people, be disruptive. Everything's about patterns in life. How do you stand out from that? For me, it's wearing sequins amongst many other things. It gives other people a dopamine hit. So going out with warmth and openness and a sense of curiosity for everyone I meet is really critical, and a sense of service. So I'm not necessarily, I hate starting conversations with what do you do? It's, who do you want to be, or who are you? Even, that very deep question makes most people go, who am I? And I think if we can move and shift to that, so many beautiful things come as a result of it. And I think I'm a living proof and example of someone who's very honest about the fact it's not a smooth journey to building business today or at any time, but particularly now in quite a tough economic environment and in a very uncertain times. I'm a huge believer and adopter of technology. I worked a lot on AI when I was at Google. I talk about the other AI, which is authentic intelligence, and I believe about the two, yin and yang. You need the artificial intelligence, but you need authentic intelligence, i.e. the truth of who you are. But I also say that there's a sense of that openness and willingness and sense of abundance. That means I love meeting people like you, Stacey, and I love meeting other women who are on the same mission I am. And sometimes people, when I first set out with people, will go, oh, but aren't they your competition? And I said, no, why are they my competition? We are all in pursuit of the same thing. I would applaud and encourage anyone who wants to try and improve our world, our situation, our community, our society, as much as I do. And there are billions of people on this planet, right? We're never short of opportunity to things we do. And we are very tribal in our behavior. We get drawn to and attached to the things that attract to me, so there are many women who sparkle and glitter is not for them. And that's cool. That doesn't make them wrong. That means that they will find their thing. But there are many that are. And I think for me, those things are liberating. As soon as you have and you hit a point of confidence, or you're with a community that you have their hand at your back, that makes you feel actually excited to share and support, that it becomes a contagion, I feel like that's really, for me, been a power source. That when I'm hitting the kind of rides of like, oh my God, there's so much work to do, and will I get a paycheck at the end of this month in the way that I need to be able to cover my, those things become an easier ride because you start to think more longer term.
Yeah, absolutely. You've touched on so many beautiful points here, and I really appreciate what you said about serendipity, because it's definitely true. Like, the more that you try to control things in life, I feel like the more you don't necessarily get the outcome that you're after, and you almost kind of block receiving, what could have been even greater. So it's definitely really wise advice, as you say, that you have a vision and you don't necessarily have everything mapped out on a clear course. And in terms of the career bucket list, I think that's really interesting to think about, because I do relate a lot to the fact of getting sucked into a specific career pathway. And then as you grow and, move up the ranks, it can be very difficult to make a move into a different industry and, to think about how you might want to do something else. And yet at the same time, the generation that we are, it's like we have been so conditioned that we need to, go to school, graduate, get a good job, and then make a good salary and have a family and do all of these things. And you've so rightfully touched on the point about the younger generation that are rewriting the rules. And I'm super excited, actually, because I love transformation and disruption. And I also really like change. I'm not afraid of change. And so I'm quite excited to see how the workplace and traditional work model will change. There's so much noise out there about, people advocating for a 4-day work week or advocating for, designing the time that you work and designing what that looks like. But yet at the same time, there's also a significant amount of resistance. And I think that it's frustrating to see so much resistance and big corporations that are fighting against that change, because with the advent of AI, I mean, the education system is going to be completely disrupted because we have a new toolkit at our disposal, much like when the internet came along and Google, your former company, came along to organize the world's information. We now have a new partner to, facilitate what we work on. So I think that your advice as well about, reflecting back and kind of wishing that you had a little side hustle earlier, I can also relate to that feeling. But at the same time, I also feel encouraged because I don't think it's too late to start. I think that now, the main message that I want people to hear is that it's never too late to start, and you shouldn't feel worried by age or circumstance. And I actually also saw something as a statistic that to give that freedom of finance, that it's good to try and have 7, I think it was like 5 to 7 streams of passive income. And now with technology, there's just greater ways to invest, even if it's small. You can start super small, invest multiple different modalities to kind of build that side income to give that cushion. Because I think that, as the younger generation is getting older and the older generation is starting to retire, those people don't want to work the same way that we worked early in our careers at all. I mean, there's no desire for that. And there's like a global shift as well for people getting back to grassroots, more simplistic living and, how the human species evolved to live. I want to shift gears a little bit actually and talk about men in this equation, because men still dominate the workplace. Men still dominate the conversation, especially when it comes to new technology and AI. So many men are at the forefront of driving that, evolution and adoption. And, you could even see it, for instance, in like the chat GPTs, the underlying bias that was there until, algorithms started to be updated with more diversity and equality with women. What do you think that we can do to help get men on our side? And also, I'm super curious to hear, like, what do men say when you talk about Glittersphere? Like, have you found males who support? Have you had any backlash from the male community?
So, I mean, it's right. And, it doesn't matter how much we want to convince ourselves otherwise. It's still very much a man's world. And the data, unfortunately, was kind of like, tells us, exactly that. I still find it shocking when you think only 2% VC funding in the UK, this is specifically, but I don't think it's hugely different around the world, but 2% of venture capital funding goes to female-founded businesses.
Wow.
Despite the fact that female-founded businesses are proven to deliver better returns. It makes no sense because there's, ultimately these should be data-driven decisions that are
Right.
for commercial gain, and yet they don't. So there's things like, you go, that's not a mistake when it's 2% that we think 98% of male-led businesses are better. That's not just a little kind of, that is an intentional thing. And it's great to see the amount of work by many different people to address that. I think for me, the way I've tried to do it, because I think one of the biggest challenges we have and have had actually over the years is that the argument has been made to be quite it's polarizing. It's almost like in order to achieve female empowerment, it was that unfortunately too much narrative is implied that men would lose. And it's never been a zero-sum game. It's always been about growing the pie, not taking a chair away. It was adding a chair, all those wonderful kind of language that was saying, look, this wasn't about displacement. This was about actually, look, there's enough to be shared and should be done. And actually it grows more, because when you include female voices, leadership, thoughts, ideas, skill, you see better growth. And so, and hence, as you say, AI is a great example of that, when, still engineering is still significantly male biased. And with such little representation of women in those engineering teams, it is not surprising you're going to get the result you get as we do today. It's also reading off existing data sources, which are significantly skewed to men, and often white privileged men versus everybody else. So that's the other thing, the intersectionality of it. So interestingly, I have, two clear thoughts on this. So I'm a big believer of male allyship. There are so many men that have been a critical part of my success and career. And I think there are still many very good men out there who genuinely see the value of equality, who recognize and want to support other women, but often will do it in the shadows. Like, they don't want to, for all sorts of reasons, fear, concern for them, for taking up space or whatever it might be, will perhaps either do the work quietly or go, well, I can't really do anything, so I'll just stay over here. And what you really need is active male allyship. So I do work with some brilliant men actually on male allyship at the moment. And one of the things we're working on is, I have a strong belief in something I'm developing at the moment called side by side, because actually I think it's really important that men and women stand by side in tackling this issue. I think one of the other things, I intentionally called my business Glittersphere. And funnily enough, when I first named it that, I did have someone say to me going, oh, Nishma, this doesn't sound very serious. Do you not think that's going to be a problem? Will people take you seriously? And I said to them, I said, well, those that understand it, yes, they will. And those that don't, great, I don't want them to. Yes. So in some respects, I created a bit of a name and an environment and a movement that was a natural repelling factor to those that I'm not interested to engage with, because I'm not here to invest my time and effort to change those that in some respects will take my energy and will shift in marginal efforts. I'd rather spend all my time and energy and sparkle on shifting those that I can make transformational change with. And so I've been quite intentional to kind of shut out the noise. I did have someone say to me, which I loved, which was absolutely not the reason why I did it, but they said to me, oh, did you call it Glittersphere as a response to the manosphere? Which I thought was very good. Well, no, I didn't, but it could be. So for me, I'm not ignorant or ignoring the men that I think are harder to shift and turn. It's a bit like PR, right? Good PR support, or in an organization, you'll be taught regularly, and we did this at Google as well, is you will inevitably have people who have something unpleasant or disruptive or controversial that they want to say about you that is not founded in fact or reason. So it's not about fair and responsible challenge. This is like the nonsense, the trolls and the rubbish that exists out there. Is you don't entertain that. I always say to people, do not engage with the trolls. Do not do that, because all you're giving is giving fuel to fire. In actual fact, what you do is you 10x the good stuff. You 10x the stuff that says, right, do you know what? We're going to go over and above to show the stuff that we do, because that's the stuff that you want to scale and create momentum around. So for me, it's always been a case of I will not engage. I'm aware, and I do a lot to point it out, shout it out, and make people create awareness of it, because it's great when you work for yourself, you have your own voice and you have no one being able to kind of censor or put guardrails around you. I can say whatever I want now. And I use my platform to call things out and try and drive change. But I will not ever invest any of my efforts and resources to convert those that I think need to go on their own journey of self-awareness. I'd much rather focus on the swing voters, those that need the help to step out of the shadows, men and women, those that will make meaningful change, and those that will celebrate and continue to uplift others. That's a much better use of my time. And I do think that there can come a point, if we can work hard enough at this, that male allyship can have a much stronger voice, and I think can then be quite, almost in some respects, attractive to more and more men to be in a certain way, create better role models for younger men, create opportunities for them to see a different way to do things, dismantle and discourage patriarchy when it's working against us. But you can only really do that when you come together. So to your point, when you have women actually not supporting each other, or whatever it might be in terms of that intersectionality, that's not helpful. It's like, where are you going to gain with this? So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I remain, as I always am, incredibly optimistic and hopeful of not entire change, but a shift in the dynamics. And I think the fact that we are even having a conversation about the role of men in equality, the role of male allyship, the active dependency responsibility of women to support young men as well. We are facing a crisis around male toxicity in the world. The vacuum that was left by a focus on only the stories of women empowerment, female empowerment, and not a side-by-side approach, created the vacuum that allowed the likes of Andrew Tate and others to fill.
Mm.
And so we have to learn from what happened in the past and not make the same mistakes again. And that's why balance and side-by-side is really important to me.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to hear more about side-by-side when you're going to be launching that, because I completely agree that allyship is really the way forward. And I think that, from my own experience at least, there hasn't really been much guidance to men on how to do this. I mean, we have International Women's Day, and of course, many corporations take this on, but it's just one day, and it's also kind of sad because I've noticed that in many different talks and networking groups and different events that I've seen within my circle over here is that when there have been conversations about, female empowerment and representation in the workplace, most of the attendees are women. And that's great that, we all are showing up for that. We all see it as a problem, but we're actually not going to get anywhere unless we have men on our side. And it's kind of sad to hear that you've come across men who are a bit afraid to be the leader in terms of, stepping out on that ledge and saying, boldly, like, I am here for this. I am an advocate. I'm a supporter. So somehow, some way, it's like we need to make this appealing to men, or, I don't know if they need an incentive or something, but.
And maybe it's not just, it's appealing, but also safe, right?
Right,
so for some
safe.
men, they get attacked by other men, potentially, who are seen as like, oh, you're not really.
Or like other men could joke with them and be like, oh, look at you. You know how men can be, trying to break each other down with their macho-ness.
And I think there's an ostracization
of
men who behave in a certain way, but also they can be attacked by women, right? So I have also seen situations where it's like, oh, you're taking up space. There was a story here about a very, very famous male footballer, who has been a brilliant male pundit for women's football, like really transformational, because his enthusiasm for the women's game has been really contagious. And actually, he has such a huge male following and is, seen as a man's man, and a male footballer is him stepping out as a celebrity to be so vocally supportive of women's football has been brilliant, right? It's actually attracted more men to the game. It's given permission for more men to enjoy the women's game as well. And actually, what was interesting is he got more attacked by the women than he did by men, who said, oh, you're taking up space, you don't belong to it. And I do not agree with that. That is why I come back to the side by side. I'm such a strong believer of going, we have to completely reshape the narratives, the events, the way we talk to audiences, so that you start to focus on going 50-50 audiences. And for the subject of equality is not a woman's job, right? Or the other's job. It's a job for everyone, right? We all benefit when this happens. It's not like, well, I'll let you do that work. And I think that's until we start to shift that attitude, and which is why, as much as I am frustrated by the rollback on DEI, I've always talked about it as going, you have to see this as an opportunity to reframe it, refresh it, redefine it. Mm-hmm. What does it actually mean? What is the narrative for equality that has led to it, watching where it's led to it being almost, diminished and demised and kind of stuck in a box? Well, don't make the same mistake again. Reinvent, be creative and do that. So I think, that's the stuff that excites me, because it is reinvention. It's creatively solving some of these big problems. But I do think that's why I think men and women have as much of an active role to play here to support male allyship and to support younger men, right? Start early. Demonstrate our allyship to younger men and women in turn. Because the problem is every time you see a news article that says, well, women are now outpacing men at university, they're outpacing them in the early stages of career, etc., you're just creating a them and us. And I
Yeah.
think we have to be really careful about that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that everyone has a role to play in that regard. And it comes back to something that you said earlier on in our conversation, was that we're billions of people. Like, people, shouldn't get stuck on the idea that, oh, this person is shining too much. You are, taking away from my opportunity, when there's so much opportunity out there. And each person can help each other to create more opportunity if we work together and, strive for that side by side approach, as you talked about. Before we go, I mean, this conversation has been so amazing, and I feel so incredibly inspired. And I really wish that, honestly, you could come out to Dubai to speak to many organizations.
Well, I will. I'm planning to be quite honest, Stacey. So we should
Yeah.
let's collaborate, coordinate on that.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's definitely, like, I don't know, it's different, every place that I've worked in my career, be it cities in the US as well as abroad, has had a different flavor, and it's all different cultural nuances that are coming together. But at the end of the day, the message is still the same and the mission is still the same. And, I personally want to, be a part of something bigger and drive that equality and success collaboratively. So I actually want to ask you, as kind of like a final question, is if you could give your younger self some advice, what would that be?
When we're little girls, right, we believed anything was possible. We had the confidence that we could only ever aspire to as we grow older. I look back, I think about, and you will do the same. I look at my daughter when she was a little girl and think, and my son actually, both of them, but look at my daughter particularly as someone who, she said, come down the stairs and go, I'm going to be a motocross rider today. And she'd come down the stairs the next day and go, I'm going to be an astronaut. And we had these great books that kind of helped to inspire, but she had this belief, great confidence. Somewhere along the lines, we lose a lot of that. We lose a lot of the confidence. We lose a lot of the dreaming. And I think my advice to my younger self would be, it's a longer journey, is you've got to just keep dreaming. Like, that ambition, never forget the dream. As you start to conform and get dragged down by the things, it's a bit like bucket list. Keep that alive. And it's not one dream. To your point, it's not, I pick one lane and that's it forever. You can have all of them. And so I think that intentional thinking is really important. I feel like when you're younger, you're in this incredible race to do things, in the sense that there is not enough time and there is all the time. And funnily, like, we flip it, I think, when we're older, which is a really interesting thing, I think, from a psychological point of view. But yeah, I would say never give up on the dream. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world says and does. Don't conform. Just be you.
I absolutely love that advice. I think it's so true that it's very easy, especially in this day and age, the society, the negativity that is unfortunately, reigning supreme in the world, that it can be so easy to lose that dream, or to lose the, aspiration or hope that that dream can become a reality. But I think that it very much can. And I agree, you should not lose sight of that dream. I really appreciate you so much for coming onto the show today, sharing all of your wisdom, your sparkle, your shine. I so much love that you wore a huge sequin shirt. So before we go, really quickly, how can people find you and find the Glittersphere?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I've loved talking to you, and especially I know that you're off to kind of do very important projects of your own, not alone just having your twins. So you can find me on LinkedIn as Nishma Patel Robb. You can find me on glittersphere.com as well for kind of the website. I have a great newsletter called All That Glitters, which is where I share a lot of my thoughts and musings, but also some of my learnings. This coming back to no gatekeeping. I want to share as many of the tips and ideas, or things that I discovered with other women, to make sure that there is enough kind of sparkle and inspiration to keep us going. and, come and investigate whether the community is for you. We've got a lot more kind of free and paid for courses. If you're in the UK, we've got events, and we are definitely going international. I've had some wonderful conversations with women in other parts of the world who would love me to bring the Glittersphere to them. So the kind of Glittersphere experience will be landing elsewhere.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good luck with the little ones.
Thank you.